So we're on Yud Zayin Amid Beis on the first wide line. It's 17b3 at the very beginning here. So the second answer to explain Rav Huna's din was, so the person would have said, this field was your father's, but I bought it from him, so he's believed. So the question was, why didn't he say, I bought it from you and you sold it to me? So we're saying in that case, he wouldn't be believed. So, and we say, according to Rav Huna, Ein machzikim b'nichsei. I'm just reading a couple lines up from where we are. If we're talking about the property of a katan, afilu higdil, even if he grew up in the middle, you can't use that time as a chazaka. And Rav Huna says, well, why did he have to say it then? According to what we're saying right now, the Mishnah, when the Mishnah says that if the person said, I bought the field from your father, the field belonged to your father, but I bought it from him, he's believed. So what's Rav Huna is telling us different than the Mishnah? So the first answer is that really that's what our Mishnah is, but the Mishnah said it from a different case, and we had to make a deal. We say from the fact that it said, it was your father's and I bought it from him, he's believed. But if it was yours and I bought it from you, then he wouldn't be believed.
Was it from father?
He bought it from the father. The son never knew that it was the father's. Meaning that's what the Mishnah said. The field, I bought the field from Yechezkel, and you never knew that your father had the field. You thought that the communists took away everyone's property. He didn't have any field. And then, so in that case, you're believed to say that I'm believed that it was Yechezkel's field, but I bought it from Yechezkel. But if I would have said it was your field and I bought it from you, then I'm not believed. And the reason is because we don't believe, or Rav Huna is saying, but now with Rav Huna, so Rav Huna diyuka de masnisin ka'amar, Rav Huna didn't learn it because the Mishnah didn't explicitly say that if I would have bought it from you, I'm not believed. We made a diuk from the Mishnah to say that did. So Rav Huna is just telling us something which we could infer from the Brisa, from the Mishnah, but it wasn't explicit in the Mishnah. And then the last narrow line in Yud Zayin Amud Beis, that even if the son grew up, he's still not allowed to. He's still not believed. The chazaka, having the field for 3 years or the property for 3 years doesn't make it the new person's field. So we are at the third word on the first wide line on 17b. It's actually the very last line on 17b2. The listening b'didei. So why didn't the Mishnah tell us about I bought the field from you? So why don't we say that it was a case where for 2 years you were using the field with the original owner there, and 1 year when the original owner wasn't there, when the original owner ran away, he during that 3rd year. So the thing is, what's so important about 3 years? One of the things that's important about 3 years is because the owner, if it wasn't the original owner or supposed original owner, has 3 years to say, get off my land and go to Beis Din and to complain that this other guy's using his land. So in the fact that he didn't, that's a sign that he must have relinquished ownership because he must have sold it or whatever, or given it away, whatever. But here, he ran away, so he wasn't there to see, at least in the 3rd year, that the guy was still using it, and therefore he couldn't issue a complaint about the guy using it. So the Gemara says, Baruch machmas mai. So this supposed original owner, why did he run away? If he ran away because he was going to be killed if he stayed there, pshitid lo mehaman. So it's simple that we don't believe the new guy to say that I had a chazaka and he didn't complain. If this guy had to run away from his life, run away to save his life, clearly he wasn't around to complain to lamatzi machi. He wasn't around to complain that what right do you have to use my field? The Baruch machmas mamon, and if he ran away for monetary reasons, So people kept asking him for money. And so he was annoyed that people kept asking him for money, for a loan, for a donation, for this or that. So he moved. So so because he wasn't in danger of his life, he should have stuck around and he should have issued a complaint that this new guy is using his field, and it would break the 3 years of chazaka that this new guy is using. The kaimalan, because we paskin macha shelo b'fanav havya macha. So if he could have gone, so let's say he went to Iowa. Let's say the field is in Illinois, he went to Iowa. So he could go to Iowa in a beis din and say, Shmerel is using my field, and it's not his field, and I'm complaining about it. I'm issuing a formal protest. So even if he left, he was able to complain. So in that case, the fact that he left is not a good enough reason to ruin the new guy's chazaka. Because again, chazaka is, I'm using the field for 3 years. If the original owner claims that he still has ownership rights to it, he should have complained in the 3 years. So he said because he ran away. So if he ran away because he was going to be killed, okay, that's a good excuse. But if he just fled the area because he kept being there's a charity campaign today and tomorrow and the next day and the day after, he couldn't take it anymore. So he left. He could have issued a protest against this person, and he would say he's squatting on my field. He could have issued it from wherever he was. So that's no excuse. Did not, because we learned in a Mishnah. Shalosh artzos l'chazaka. I think there's a Mishnah in Cheskes Abatim in Bava Basra. Yeah. There's 3 lands with 3 different rules for chazaka. Yehuda ve'Ever Yarden v'Galo. Yehuda, the other side, the eastern side of the Jordan and the Galil. Yehuda v'Hechzik v'Galil. If the person was in Yehuda and he took chazaka of a property, or someone took chazaka of a property in the Galil, the Galil v'Hechzik v'Yehuda, or he was in Galil and someone took chazaka of a property in Yehuda, Eino chazaka ad she'imo b'Medina. It's not a chazaka until the owner or the original owner is with the new owner who's taking chazaka in the same region. I mean, Medina means country, but here we mean region. The original owner has to be in Yehuda, and the new person who's taking a chazaka on the field has to be in Yehuda, or both in the Galil. We had discussed this halacha and my kasavar. What does the Tana hold? If the original owner can issue a complaint that this guy is squatting in my field and he has no rights to it because it's my field, when they're in different places, if that's a good protest, even if they were in separate places, he should be able to make this complaint. And if he holds that to complain not in the presence of the squatter, the alleged squatter, is not a good complaint, Yehuda Nami. Even if they'd both be in Yehuda, that's not good enough, because let's say one person would be in the south end of Yehuda or southwest part of Yehuda, and the other person was in the northeast part of Yehuda, and let's say in those days it was more than a full day's journey between the two, let's say. So even if they're in the same region, that doesn't, being in the same region doesn't make them in the same room at the same time. So we can't infer from this Mishnah one way or the other if a protest has to be in the presence of the alleged squatter. So Rab Abba Bar Mamal. So Rab Abba Bar Mamal explained, because really the author of that Mishnah holds that you are allowed to complain not in the presence of the alleged squatter. But the Mishnah was in a time of emergency situations where they really wouldn't be able to travel back and forth. So therefore, they have to be in the same country. But now the next step is going to be still the same country. If there's so restrictions, be even in the same country, maybe it's not good. Umayshna Yehuda v'Golil do not got. So why did the Mishnah mention specifically Yehuda and Galil and ignore Evrei Yarden? Because Evrei Yarden is one of the regions, and then all the examples that he gave excluded Evrei Yarden. So the answer is the Stam Yehuda Galil Kashas Cherem Damu, because in general Yehuda and Galil are in a state where there's some type of war going on, so you can't travel between them. So another way of saying this is that there's not too much communication or travel between these two regions at all in general. However, part of the answer was from Rabbi Bar Mama is that the original owner does not have to issue his protest against the alleged squatter in the presence of the alleged squatter. He can complain in a different base din.
This has been addressed in a different way elsewhere in Gemara,
Okay.
hasn't it?
I mean, the main Gemara is in the third chapter of Baba Basra that talks about Chazaka.
But no, about squatting and about the owner having such stars.
Yeah. So it got dragged into our Gemara here because our Mishnah said that if a person said, because we were talking about if the husband and wife, or the soon-to-be ex-husband and ex-wife, or the already ex-husband and ex-wife are complaining about the amount of her ksuva, we said if there's a witness who remembers that she might have the hemna, the special hadas woven canopy or whatever, we believe that she was a virgin when she got married, and her ksuva is 200, even though we have no written record of that. And then the Mishnah said, and also, if someone said, this field used to be your father's, but I bought it from him, he's also believed. So then the Gemara was saying, that's how we got into this. And then the Gemara says, but we learned from here, if he would have said the field was yours and I bought it from you, then he wouldn't be believed. And now we're discussing about that, about what complaint the owner could have taken.
Right.
It's not a Kesuvos issue. And
it's not as in depth as the other. Okay.
Right.
All right.
We're right. So there it talks about all the different details and specific cases. This is about this one particular thing about if the person. So what we're talking about right now is if a person was present where the squatter was, or alleged squatter was squatting in his field, and by squatting in the field he was acquiring chazaka rights to the field through chazaka. What if he wasn't there all 3 years to complain all 3 years? And the somewhat of the analogy of where it came into is, let's say that it was his father's field, and then the father died, and now it's his field. So it was in his family when the squatter was squatting in the field, or potential purchaser was using it for 3 years, but it wasn't all the same owner, because part of the time was the father, and part of the time was the son who got it through inheritance. Okay, so Velisni, why didn't the Tana gave a different case? Motor Rabbi Yeshua, Ba'omer Chavera Mane Lavis Mimcha Parativlach, Shehunema. Rabbi Yeshua, who's a Tana, agrees if so. Again, the end of the first chapter, we had several Mishnayos where Rabbi Yeshua did not at all believe the woman, whether she was midaberes, she was speaking, quote unquote, with the man. They said, what's his story? And she said, he's a Kohen and he's kosher. Or she was pregnant, and they said, who are you pregnant from? So Rabbi Yeshua did not believe the women in those cases. But there's a case where Rabbi Yeshua says, if he says, if I said to Larry, I borrowed $100 from you, but I paid it back already, so I would be believed in that case. So why couldn't the Mishnah use that case to illustrate that that in that case Rabbi Yeshua would also agree in that case that the person makes this claim and he's believed with his claim? So the Gemara says Mishum Tekaboy Lemisni Seifa, because then the end of the Mishnah says Imish Edim Shehu Lava Mimani Vihu Omer Parati Ve'eno Naman. If there were witnesses that he borrowed, so there's witnesses that I had borrowed from Larry, and then Larry says, excuse me, and I would say I paid it back, Eino Naman, then I wouldn't be believed. But we hold if you borrow money, or if someone lends money with witnesses, it does not need to be repaid with witnesses. So that case, to quote the case of Rabbi Yeshua saying, I borrowed money from you but paid you back, to be believed, it wouldn't fit in our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says if there were witnesses that Larry had lent the money to me, then I wouldn't be believed. But we paskin that even if you lend money with witnesses, you don't have to repay it with witnesses. So then this case of Rabbi Yeshua wouldn't fit with the last clause of the Mishnah, because the last clause of the Mishnah says, but if there were Eidim against me, I'm saying I borrowed and I paid back. If there's witnesses who say, yes, he did borrow, we don't know anything about it being paid back, then I wouldn't be believed. But because we don't paskin that way, because we paskin that if you even if you lent the money with witnesses, it doesn't have to be repaid with witnesses. So just because there's witnesses that said I borrowed doesn't mean that I didn't repay. So that case would not fit in with the words of the Mishnah. So listening, why doesn't it mention a different possible case? Moder Rabbi Yeshua ba'omer l'chaver amana lavicha b'yadav v'achalti pras. Shehunaman. He said, I borrowed $100 from your father, but I repaid half of it. So there is a halacha. The Gemara mentions here that in general, there's a case, not the Gemara. You're showing to mention in general that if someone says you owe me money and I say no, so then it's just a dispute. Unless either side can bring witnesses, we don't know what to do. If however someone says you owe me money, he said you owe me $100. He said no. He says I don't owe you $100, but I owe you 50. Once you admit to owing part of the amount, then that's called moda b'mikzas. You agree to partial, and there's a Torah oath that you would take if you're moda b'mikzas. So here, if he says, so now the Gemara is saying, why don't we say that Rabbi Yeshua would say that if I say I borrowed $100 from your father, but I paid back half of it, I'm believed with, and I don't have to take a shvuah. I don't have to take an oath that I don't owe any more than that half, or whatever percentage it is. So Rashi says that in this case, why is a moda b'mikzas? Someone who admits owing part of the amount takes a shvuah. That's because he was confronted with a claim and he's denying the claim. So in order to give his claim more truthfulness, he has to take a shvuah, which is a very strict thing. We don't even compel shvuahs anymore. But Rashi says because in this case the person brought up the whole issue by himself, he can't be compelled to take a shvuah. He'd only be in the times where we would take a shvuah. That would be a case where his counterclaim was in response to an original claim. But here the other person didn't know anything about the loan, and I'm saying I borrowed money from your father, but I paid back half. So because what I said paying back half isn't a response to a claim, it's not a counterclaim, I don't have to take a shvuah. So the Gemara says aliba dema. So according to which opinion would I be believed without having to take a shvuah? Aliba Rabbi Lazar ben Yaakov Hamar shvuah bay. If we say according to, Aliba Rabbanan ha'amri meishav aveda havi. The Rabbanan say that he should pay the money back because it's like he's like doing hashavas aveda. Because this person did not know that his father made the loan at all. From the fact that I'm telling you that I owed your father money and here it is, I have a status of returning a lost item. You didn't even know you lost it, but it's hashavas aveda. And when you do hashavas aveda, you never have to make a shvuah. And if it follows Rabbi Lazar ben Yaakov, according to Rabbi Lazar ben Yaakov, you would have to take a shvuah in this case. So if Rabbi Yeshua would have said this case where I would tell you I borrowed money from your father, but I paid back half of it, it wouldn't fit with Rabbi Lazar ben Yaakov and it wouldn't fit with the Rabbanan. The Tanya, because we learned in a brayso, Rabbi Lazar ben Yaakov Omer Pa'amim Sha'adam Nishba'al Tainas Atzmo. There's a times that a person would have to make an oath from his own claim. Normally, the oath would be for in a response to a claim or a counterclaim. But Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says no. You could be obligate yourself to make an oath from your own claim. Keitzad, what's a case like this? Mana lavicha b'yadi b'achlita pras, which is our case. You said to someone, your father had, so mana lavicha b'yadi means I had $100 of your father in my hand. It doesn't necessarily say it was a loan. It doesn't necessarily say it was a pikadon. A pikadon is a deposit. Because in those days, they didn't have banks. Sometimes you'd go to someone trustworthy and say, I'm could you watch this for me? Obviously, would have a status of a shomer, of a custodian, and then there's, four levels of a shomer. There's a shomer chinam, someone who's watching it for free, and he doesn't have that much obligations. And then there's a shomer sachar. You're being a custodian for pay, so then you have more responsibilities. A shoel, someone who borrows something, is considered a custodian, but because he's borrowing it, he's liable for just about anything that would happen to it. A shomer chinam, a shomer sachar, a shoel, and what's the last case? I can't remember. And is the last case a socher, or someone who rents it? I'm not sure what the fourth is. But when it says mana lavicha b'yadi, we're not necessarily sure if it was a loan or he's saying, I was a custodian for this money. So hareza nishba. According to Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, this person who admits to having this other person's father's money, and this other person had no clue about it, he has to take a shvua that he only owes however much he owes, the half. This is a case where you have to swear for your own claim. But the Chachamim say in this situation that he's like returning a lost object. This guy didn't even know that his fathers had lent money, so he didn't know it was part of his father's estate. So when the guy says, your father, let me $100 and I paid back 50, so here's the other 50. The 50 that he's paying now is like returning a lost object. So there would be no shvua for that. So Rabbi Yeshua's claim wouldn't fit according to Al Chachamim. So now we're going to go off on a bigger tangent. So Marty, please put on your seatbelt. It's a very tangent on a tangent here. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov leisle meishav aveda pater. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov doesn't hold the concept that if you're like returning, that this person is like returning a lost object to the creditor who didn't even know he was a creditor because his father had lent the money. Everyone agrees to that. How could he reject that claim? So that the principle. So Amar Rav says b'toino katan. The case is where the dead person's son is a child, and the child is making a complaint against it. Now, so in that case, it's not where the child doesn't know about it. The child knows about it, and he's bringing him to Din Torah about it. It happens to be that we have mentioned in general, we haven't mentioned specifically, but in general, the Gemara, the Torah, and the Chachamim are very, very strict about the estate of Yisomim, of orphans. Their father died. It's very strict. They usually don't let people collect from it, and they appoint an apitropos, which would be some type of regent or trustee over the estate to make sure that everything's in order and not be able to spend whatever they want. They have to keep most of the principal there for the kids to decide what to do with it when they grow up. So in this case, the Yasom, the son of the deceased, is claiming the money. So in that case, he would make a shvua. But in general, you wouldn't have to, and it would be like, and if you're paying back the son of this dead person, who you had borrowed money from, you would have a status of being Meishav Aveda, returning a lost object. So the Gemara doesn't like this. It says, "V'amar mar einish boin al tainas chereshot v'katan." If a cherish, who is someone who cannot speak or talk, so halachically they do not have the status of someone mentally competent. We're not saying that they're not, but in order to have the status of a legally competent majority person, you need to be able to speak in here. A shota is someone suffers from certain type of mental illness and is not always lucid and stuff. and a katan, a child. So if any of these three types of people try to compel you for certain claims in Beis Din, you do not have to make a shavua. We actually do not make a shavua. Making a shavua is very severe because you're using Hashem's name. And that could be potentially, shavua is its own mitzvah, but it's related also to the third of the Aser Sadibros. So how could Rav say that a katan brought this claim, and therefore he takes a shvua? Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov holds he takes a shvua because it's in response to a katan's claim. Katan's claim does not compel a shvua. So the question is, my katan gadol. So it's really, he wasn't a minor son; he's a bar mitzvah son. But why is he called a katan? Delagabi mili da'aviv katanhu, because in regard to his father's affairs, he is considered a katan. His father ran things. He didn't know everything his father did. Maybe he found something in his father's ledger book. So that's why he brings the claim. But he is not a literal katan. He's just a katan because he was not the one who was involved in this loan or depositing this thing by this other person to be a custodian. So ihachi tainas atzmo, tainas acherem he. If so, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says sometimes you claim from yourself. According to Rav's answer, it wasn't his own claim. It was in response to the claim of the katan, or the adult son of the father. So he's not compelling himself to take a shvua. It's based on the claim of someone else. So then that's not a unique din anymore. So the Gemara says, Tainas acherim vodas atzmo. It's true that it's the claim of someone else that he's responding to, but v'hodas atzmo, it's also his own admission, because he is agreeing to having owed part of the amount. So then the Gemara says, Kuli tanasa acherim vodas atzmo ninhu. Every time that there's a claim, it has, and you would take a shvua as a place where someone's claiming against you, and you responded with a response. So then this is no different than any other claim. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov was saying this case is a unique case that you can compel yourself to take a shvua. But if so, it's just like any other case where you take a shvua. So there's no chiddush. What's Rabbi Yaakov been saying? This is a special time where you can force yourself to take a shvua based on your own claim. So elahacha b'derabba kamiflagi. So we had to abandon this Rav's answer about it being a katan. Elahacha b'derabba kamiflagi. So this has to do with the machlokas. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov and the Chachamim are arguing with the din of Rabba. The Amar Rabba mipnei Amar Torah moda b'miktas atayna yishava. Why did the Torah say that if you agree to part of the claim, you have to swear? So, for example, he said, someone came, Shmuel said that I owed him $100. And I said, I owe you 50, not 100. So, in that case, the Torah says I have to swear. So I'd have to swear. Obviously, the halacha is the Torah, you have to swear because the Torah said you have to swear. But what's the reason behind it? A chazaka ain't adameiz panav bifnei ba'chovo. Because a person isn't going to be so chutzpahdik. The word meiz panav means to be chutzpahdik. ArtScroll translates it as brazen, but a person isn't chutzpahdik to before his creditor. So really, I wanted to deny the whole thing. No, I don't owe you one penny. But the only reason that I didn't deny the whole thing is because people don't have that amount of chutzpah. So that's why you have to make a shvua. So now, as we turn to Yechas Beis, v'kula boy deludile, v'hai delo udile ki hecha delishtamitle. So really, he wanted to admit the whole claim. Ludi is like the word moda, to admit. So really, I wanted to admit I owed all $100. V'hai delo udile, the reason I didn't admit to all $100 ki hecha delishtamitle. I was trying to push him off and say until I have the full amount, then I full amount. Meaning right now I only have $50. I borrowed from him. I want to pay him back, but right now I only have $50. And it doesn't look good if I can't pay back the whole loan amount. So I'm denying as a stalling tactic, not because I'm denying and not because I want to deny, but because that's all I have right now to pay back. V'savar ad havili luzuza per nislan. Until I have the full amount, I'm going to pay the whole amount. Brachmana Amar, but the pasuk says Rami Shvua Alei. The Torah says I have to take a shvua when I admit to half. In order that I will admit to the whole thing, meaning because the psychology of the way that Jews are taught is that we don't want to take a shvua, even if we know that it's true. It's such a serious thing. We'd rather not take a shvua. So the fact that I would have to take a shvua for Modeh B'Mikdash would influence me to admit that I owe the whole amount. So this is what Rabbi says. So how does this become the machlokas between Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov and the Chachamim? Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov savar loshna bov loshna b'vno. When we have this chazaka, so a chazaka is a presumption of human nature or of physical reality, is that Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov holds that the chutzpah that I wouldn't have in front of my creditor applies to the creditor's son also. Eino meis, I wouldn't be that chutzpahdik. And therefore, when I admit to owing part of the debt, or the case that we started with was, I said I owed money to your father, but I already paid back half of it. So Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says that the chazaka of human behavior that I wouldn't be chutzpahdik to my creditor would apply to his son also. Rabbanan Savri Boda Eino Meis, Avo Bivno Meis. But the Chachamim say the chazaka that a person wouldn't be that chutzpahdik is only to the creditor himself. But for the son of the creditor, what does he have to do with the son of the creditor? He doesn't feel from a human behavior perspective, I'm not indebted to him, so I'll be a stronger claim. I'm not going to be bashful in giving this person who's not really my creditor. From the fact that he didn't deny it completely and he wasn't chutzpahdik, it shows that he must be telling the truth, and therefore he has the status of someone who's returning a lost object, and he's believed without a shavua. Now, I don't think what would be a similar case to this nowadays. Nowadays, it's a simple thing. I mean, it's a simple thing with very big bad consequences. If I took a loan from a mortgage from a bank, and the bank then sells my mortgage to someone else. So in that case, they own the loan against me, but I never borrowed from them. So I don't feel any psychological inhibition from telling them, I didn't borrow anything from you, because it's true, I didn't borrow anything from him. The fact that he's holding my loan, that doesn't give us the relationship of creditor and debtor. So I don't know how we would pass it. I'm just bringing this as an example of a case. I mean, you could say that neither opinion here, even if you hold that if the son would take over the loan from the father, you wouldn't have chutzpah, that's because the loan by Yerusha passed on. So Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says you're not going to have chutzpah, but even Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov might agree if someone sells the loan to someone else, I never borrowed money from that other guy. It's true, he might be holding my loan, but the chutzpah that a person doesn't have to the creditor would apply to the person I took the loan from. And Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says, well, even the son of the creditor, even though I didn't borrow from him, but it's an extension of his father's estate, whatever. So the chazaka still holds. But it could be Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov would agree if someone sold the mortgage, this chazaka doesn't apply. Because there's no relationship between me and the new person who bought the loan. We'll just assume that I originally borrowed my mortgage from a person and that person sold it to another person. Nowadays, in the way that ours works now, you borrow from the bank, and the bank 99.9% of the time sells it to Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae or a different bank, whatever. I'm just trying to say that as crazy as this halacha sounds, we know that there's cases that are similar to that. I mean, there's reasons why this case wouldn't have applied, that even Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov wouldn't apply to that case. But we have to think of cases where what the Gemara is saying is not so different from what we talk about now. Okay, Mishnah. Okay, so now we're going on off topic from Kesuvos completely. However, it is related to Kesuvos because we're talking about if someone comes with a shtar, with a signed document saying that someone owes them money, can you always collect, or what do you have to do in order to be able to collect to authenticate the shtar? So since ksuva, for the most part, is written, so that's related to ksuvos. But this is the next few blat are it's monetary law and contract law. So it's very important stuff. It's stuff that I am not so familiar with. But that's why we're learning it. We learn the stuff that's not familiar, so become familiar with it. So if someone comes to Basin with the shtar and says, you owe me money, and the person says, I did not owe you money, this must be some type of forged document. So we have to do what's called kiyum shtaros. So kiyum shtaros means we have to establish that the witnesses who signed on it really did sign on it. And therefore, because it's signed by witnesses, it has a status of being an actionable document, and we can collect based on that document. So how do you do kiyum shtaros? So when we in the Beis Din send a get, when do we do this? When we're going to be sending a get to another Beis Din, we usually do kiyum shtaros on it right away. We immediately, so we have to authenticate the signature. So either the witnesses themselves come to the Beis Din and say, yes, this is our signature, or someone else comes to the Beis Din and says, we know these people and this is their real signature, or the Beis Din has a copy in their files, whatever, of a different shtar with those witnesses on it, and they take a look at it and they see that it's the same signature. So then the Beis Din themselves are authenticating the signatures. So lahavdil, it's not that lahavdil in a bank. If something, when you open an account, they go into your file and they look at your signature card, right? Banks have a signature card, so it's a similar thing. So if we would have a get that the husband would deposit into the hands of the shliach, and then the shliach is going to give it to another shliach to deliver it to the wife. So we will immediately authenticate our signatures to the Beis Din. And then there's other times when one Beis Din and a shliach sends a get to another town. Let's say from Israel they sent the get here. They sign signature cards also. The Dayanim sign several sets of signature cards and send that with the get also. Not signature cards on the get, but signature cards of the Dayanim, because the Dayanim signed that the get was already authenticated. So, I mean, this is something that we do. So if witnesses said, yes, this is our signatures, but we were forced to sign it, it wasn't true. Anusim hayinu, we were forced. Ketanim hayinu, we were children at the time. We weren't bar mitzvah yet. Or psule eidos hayinu, we were ineligible to give testimony. So Rashi says something interesting here. Rashi says, oh no, Rashi's later on. Yeah, Rashi says here on the last wide line, the fourth line from the top, either we were relatives, either to each other or to one of the parties on the get, or mesachkim bekuvia, we were gamblers. So it's important to understand this Rashi, well, on a couple levels. People who are relatives are believable people. It's just that in regard to their relatives, they're not believed. Someone who's a gambler like this, Mesachkim Bekuvia, which literally means they play with the dice. So Mesachkim Bekuvia on a Torah level are believed, but on a rabbinic level, they're not believed. So I think that this is an important Rashi because he's saying that when they're saying we're Pasal the Eidos, they're saying, they're saying on a Torah level, I'm a believable person. But in this particular case, I'm not be believed, either because I'm related to someone or I'm only Pasal Midrabanan. But you could believe me, the Torah level, I'm believed to say that I'm a kosher aid, but on the rabbinic level, I'm not believed. We'll see later on in the Gemara, because there's a halachic principle that Ein Adam Mesim Atzmo Rasha. a person is not believed to make himself a rasha. So if someone says, say, my name comes to base and say, I'm Bertie Madoff and I stole millions of dollars from people. Well, because you're not allowed to, you can't give testimony about yourself. You're related to yourself. So we can't believe you from the fact that you are confessing to a crime. Now it's a bit of an oversimplification, but in general, you're not believed. If you admit to a crime, you're not believed because people have credibility or namanas, more believability when talking about someone else. I don't have believability if I'm talking about a relative or myself. So Basin's not allowed to believe me when I say I did a big avera. Now, one thing which we do believe is if you stole something and then you did something. Let's say you sold it, or you stole an animal and then you shafted it, and you shafted it, you butchered it, and you sold it. So you have to pay, besides for paying back the actual sheep, whatever that you stole, you have to either pay back double, or if you had butchered it and sold it, you have to pay 4 times if it's a goat, and 4 times if it's a sheep, or 5 times if it's
Goat and sheep. Valid.
they're both.
Otherwise, hey.
Oh, okay. I thought it was stavka sheep because you carry the sheep, but a goat you wouldn't carry. So so a bigger animal like a cow you would pay 5 times. A sheep you pay 4 times. And there was in last week's 2 weeks ago Parsha Mishpatim, the Rashi brings down from Chazal that a sheep sometimes may not want to go with you, so you might carry it. So because you had some embarrassment from carrying the sheep to make it go with you, you only have to pay 4 times its value. But a bigger animal you can't carry, you have to lead it, you pay 5 times the value of the animal. So if you'd say I stole this animal and butchered it, you would exempt yourself from paying the 4 or 5 times extra. You wouldn't exempt yourself from paying the original value of the animal that you stole, but you could exempt yourself from paying what we call the knas, the fine, which a little bit more precisely than a fine is a knas is an amount that you pay over and above the actual damage caused. So if I stole a cow that was worth $600, but then I butchered it, so now I have to pay what I say was worth $600. So now I have to pay $3,000. Well, the $2,400 that's above and beyond the actual value, that's called a knas, which you translate as a fine, but it may not be the same exact legal word as fine. So if I admit to stealing it and butchering it, I don't have to pay the extra $2,400. I could exempt myself from that. It's not that I'm not believed, but there's a special halacha that moda b'knas pater. If you can admit to owing a knas, you don't have to pay the knas. So according to Rashi, they were saying that, so if they would have come and said, I'm Bertie Madoff Jr., they're completely not believed at all, because the Torah says we don't believe anyone who's guilty of monetary crimes or has done averos that people know about. But they say, we did sign this star, but either we were forced to sign it or we were katanim, so we weren't allowed to sign it, or we were either related to someone or we were pasul b'derabbanan. Hareilu nemanim. We believe them, and therefore the star is not confirmed, and therefore the owner of the person who has the star is not able to take action or compel a payment to be made based on that star. But if there are witnesses that confirm the signature, or we have their signatures on another star which has already been confirmed, then we don't believe them, because we have independent source that the star was signed properly by kosher witnesses. So whatever the star says, we can enforce the terms of that star. But what it sounds like is that if they come to Beis Din and say, we were forced to sign it, it wasn't true, but the Beis Din says, no, we already have your signature on file from something else, then we don't believe them. That's what it sounds like. So the Gemara says, when it says we were forced to do it, that's when they were forced for monetary reasons. So meaning in the last case, this is going, okay, so we had two cases in our Mishnah. The first case of the Mishnah says they said we were forced or we were minors or we were relatives. They're not believed. They are believed, and the shtar is not enforceable. But the second case was if they came and said, "Oh, we were forced," but Beis Din says, "Oh, it doesn't matter. We already have your signatures from another confirmed document, so we believe you." Then we don't believe them. So it sounds like Rami Bar Chama is talking about the last case of the Mishnah. Lo shanu ela shanu. Why are they not believed if they said we were forced for monetary reasons? They were going to fire us from our job if we wouldn't have signed the shtar. So I had to sign the shtar. But if they said we're going to kill you unless you sign the shtar, if they said we were going to kill you unless you sign the shtar, then they are believed, even though the Beis Din can confirm their signature through another signature that the Beis Din has on file or witnesses coming. Amar le Rava said to Rami Bar Chama, there's a halacha that once a witness testifies, he's not able to amend or change his testimony. Now, the Gemara in Makos, I think it says that if a witness is testifying, they can change what they say within Tokidei Dibor. So within like 2 or 3 seconds, they can change. But once they gave their testimony or even stop for that long, then they can't amend or change their testimony. So from the fact that they signed the document, signing the document is a form of testimony. We're going to see, or not today, but we're going to see halachic principles about this. So once they sign the testimony, they can't come back later and say we were being forced at gunpoint to sign the shtar, because signing a shtar is a form of testimony. Telling the Beis Din we were forced to sign this is another form of testimony, but you're not allowed to change your testimony. So even if they say that we were forced at gunpoint, they wouldn't be believed anyway because of a different principle we have about eidos. And if you want to say that's only true about oral testimony, but written testimony can be changed, you can't say that. Reish Lakish says, witnesses who are signed on a shtar, it's as if they were investigated, their words were interrogated as in Beis Din. So written testimony, according to Reish Lakish, has the same status as if they gave testimony in front of the Dayanim themselves. So it is no different whether it's written testimony or oral testimony. Now, there's one important difference. The halacha is mipiyam v'lo mipiksavam. We don't allow written testimony. The only written testimony that we would accept in Beis Din is a shtar. And the fact that it's signed by 2 witnesses make it as if the witnesses told the Beis Din that this is what happened. So Ela ki idmar reisha idmar. So when Rami Bar Chama said this was that they're not believed, well, we'll see what he says about that's if it's monetary case, but if it was on threat of lives, it's talking about the first half of the Mishnah. Hare ilu namanin. Our Mishnah said if they said we were children or we were forced, so when we were forced, they're believed. Amar Rami Bar Chama said, Lo elo sha'amru anusamina machnas nefashos. That's only true if they said we were forced at gunpoint. We were going to be killed unless we signed it. Amar anusamina machnas mamon eino nemanin. But if they say we were forced for monetary purpose, we were going to be fired from our jobs unless we signed the shtar, ein nemanin. They are not believed. My time, why not? Ein adamesim atzmo rasha. There's a halacha that a person is not believed himself to make himself into a rasha. So from the fact that he says I signed the document falsely, that's a big no-no. So we wouldn't believe them to say that that they did this avera. Okay, it's time for mincha, so we'll have to leave it here. So we're at 6 lines up from the bottom at Tana Rabbana.